Hi, welcome to JJ's Productions, and I'm back with another Thrawn chapter review. So, I've been reading chapters 4 and 5 of Thrawn by Timothy Zahn, and it's been quite an interesting pair of chapters, just in the sense that compared to the first three, which all focused on Thrawn and arguably his introduction to the Empire, the first chapter I read, chapter 4, this one focused on Iranida Price. I hope I'm saying her name right, because, we know her from Rebels. She was prominent in seasons 3 and 4. She was the governor of Lothal at that time, Lothal. So, as a character, she is quite interesting. If anything, she's very ruthless in that show. So, while she isn't at Thrawn's level as far as ingenuity goes, it was definitely interesting seeing her introduced to the canon, essentially. So, I was quite interested to read the chapter as soon as I realised it was going to be about her. So the idea is that she starts off in this chapter as part of a family's mining business, and she has a meeting with a Arik Uvis, who works for another Rebels alumni, Governor Azadi at the time. And yeah, that was quite interesting because again, you're getting connections with Star Wars Rebels. It's all set on Lothal, so again, there's connections there. So it is quite interesting reading it and thinking, okay, so where does she go next? So the idea is she's part of the family mining business. It doesn't specify exactly what her role is, but it seems like she's pretty much running it. Her mother is the general manager, but later on it's alluded that she has more control over finances than her mother. So I would argue she's probably quite powerful within that company, to call it that. Anyway, the idea is that the mining company, it's just uncovered a new source of a new material called doomium. Okay, I'm not giving them 10 out of 10 for creativity over that name, but let's just skirt over that. So yeah, the idea is doomium is used to create, or at least used in the creation of ships for the Imperial Navy. So naturally the Empire will want it. So that is an interesting MacGuffin that drives this chapter. The idea is that Arik Uvis, he wants to secure protection for the mining company, and in return, he wants his share of the company because he's part of him and what's his name, Governor Azadi, that's it. They actually have a stake within the mining guild or the mining company, so they want an increase in their stake. They essentially want to take over, well, maybe not a full takeover, but they want to have majority control. So Arianda isn't particularly impressed by that. She pretty much flat out kicks him out. She says, if you don't go, I'll get the security droids on you. So she is quite ruthless even at this point. I'll be honest, it's quite ballsy kicking out a stakeholder in your company. So yeah, that was interesting. After that, there is quite an interest. Well, Muse interesting a lot, but it is when you're trying to flesh the character out. Interesting is a simple way to describe it. That there's a very brief description about how she travels back from work, and it's essentially the idea that she sees the horizon with the Capitol building, and you've got children playing, and she just describes it as something she detests. And I think, okay, so your life isn't very great. Or at least that you don't see colour in the world. You'd rather live in black and white. And I sort of can believe that based on Rebels, but again, it's quite interesting how she starts here. She doesn't progress to that point. She's literally starts there. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the book that actually develops a character, because again, she isn't what we see in Rebels, but equally she is still pretty dark already. So the idea is she returns home from work, and her mother has been arrested for embezzlement at the behest of Governor Azadi's office. So immediately her father believes it's Arik Uvis, or at least he's got some say in it. Price didn't tell her parents about the potential takeover, so she fears something could go wrong if her father gets involved, so she tells him, wait behind, I'll deal with it. So next day, Price sees the local senator, Domus Rankin, and there's an interesting conversation again. Interesting once again, I'm using that word, but there's a lot of subtext. It's the idea of, can I trust this guy? And the overwhelming feeling is no, she doesn't. And at the end of the chapter, there's a definite feeling she doesn't trust him, but she feels she can use him. Throughout the chapter, she's alluded to the idea of she wants to get away from Lothal, she wants to see the stars, she wants to go to Coruscant. And essentially, that's what he offers her. He says, if you allow me to if you allow me to take over the mining business of yours, not like a percentage, if you let me take it over and give it to the Empire, I will allow you to work for me in Coruscant, and I'll make sure your mother is released from prison and your family are taken care of on another mining guild somewhere. So it's, I mean, I read it and actually thought it was a bit of a shoddy offer myself, but it's what she wanted. You know, I actually gave Rankin a bit too much credit there, because she actually does position herself into getting the job in Coruscant. She realizes that she can manipulate him, so I'll give Price credit there. But equally, he falls hook, line, and sinker for it. You know, he doesn't try and offer her something midway. He actually gives her what she wants. So for me, that's a case of he's happy doing that, but equally, she had to push him for it. So yeah, I feel like she could have pushed harder if she'd wanted, but she'd have probably only got what she wanted anyway. So yeah, it was an interesting discussion. I would have liked to have seen what would have happened if she pushed harder, but considering she was already asking for a lot, I suppose that's about it. That's about all she would get. So anyway, the idea is the chapter ends with her driving back to tell her parents, and the idea is she doesn't really care what their opinions are. She's doing it, and she just vows to actually gain the upper hand over Rankin for putting her in this position, which I do think is quite interesting, because the chapter frames Governor Azadi and Eric Uvis as being the antagonists to her, but pretty much anyone is an antagonist to her if they go against what she wants, which would have been keeping the company. So yeah, she does vow to get her revenge, and if I remember, also getting the company back. So I can't remember if that happened in the show. I didn't hear any word of that. It's probably a bit hard to flesh that out in a television show based on other characters, but I would like to know if that did happen. So anyway, chapter 5, I actually found this the meatier chapter, and again, a book about Thrawn, you want to read Thrawn. So as much as I did enjoy the Price insights, I wanted to get back to Thrawn, and this didn't disappoint. So the idea is, it's a month since we last met them. They've been hazed a little bit at the academy, and they have a little bit of funny banter about the idea of, oh, has it been 3 instants? Has it been 2 instants? You know, even though they're the odd couple, Vanto doesn't want to be there, Thrawn's pretty much just dragging him along. Even though that situation is there, they seem to have good humour. So as a pair, they do work well together, and Thrawn could pretty much chew up a page as far as I'm concerned. Every line of dialogue is beautiful to read. So yeah, you can't really write Thrawn wrong, I'm guessing, in this instance. Anyway, the idea is you get an invite from 2 of the cadets, Spen Corbar and Rosita Torre. And it's the idea that they've been invited for a card game in a science lab or something like that. And the idea is you aren't allowed to gamble in the Imperial Academy. So immediately red flags are raised, because it's like, this feels like a trap. And Thrawn pretty much says the best way to deal with a trap is to spring it. So, bit of Obi-Wan there, I feel. But yeah, it's quite interesting, because it's the idea that Thrawn basically learns the game. He learns the game of cards and essentially says, right, I know what I'm talking about now. Let's just walk in there and let's see what they try and throw at us. So it is, from there, a very good discussion. I'm trying not to say interesting, but it is a good discussion that follows between Orbar, the essentially leader of this little group of cadets, and Thrawn. For the record, I haven't mentioned this yet, but Spen Corbar was referred to as being the son of an influential senator in Coruscant. So he's got power. Maybe not within the academy, but he's got a dad who can sort of come to his rescue. So there is that intimidation there as well for Vanto, which is why I think it was quite interesting how Thrawn pretty much took this encounter by the scruff of the neck. So the discussion they have is on the surface about military tactics, or at least tactics within the card game they're playing, but it becomes about military tactics. And Orbar is talking about the idea of you can have an unbeatable hand in the card game. So I'll admit I don't play poker, but I'm going to assume that having two aces is a good pair of cards to have drawn to you. And the idea is Thrawn's argument when he's presented with this, what happens if I've got the unbeatable hand? He says, well, you can't. You know, I could equally have the chance of having them same cards. Which, if we're talking about real cards, for instance, that is true. If I've got two aces, chances are my opponent could have two aces. Even though it's highly improbable, there is a chance. So that's Thrawn's argument. You have not got an unbeatable hand, you've just got a very strong hand. And from there, it's a case of Thrawn actually manipulates Orbar into playing his hand straight away, which is bringing in a, what is it called, an instructor. An instructor is basically just a level above the cadets, but not so far as the officers and the commandants and all them lot. So essentially, he plays his card by getting the instructor in. Just before the instructor walks in, Thrawn pulls out of his tunic the lieutenant's insignia that he was given in the previous Thrawn chapter and puts it onto his uniform. That way, showing all the cadets that he is a lieutenant, but also when the instructor comes in, he also realises that he outranks him. So it was a brilliant power play in that sense. It's probably, you can only something you do once. You can't keep playing that card, but you would imagine it to go and just frighten him off publicly. I say publicly because what happens is, soon after that, they leave the room. Thrawn does have a bit of a gloat at the Orbar, but that's about it. So after that, Thrawn and Vanto just have a quick discussion. Thrawn explains the timing was the important thing, not necessarily the action. He says if I'd done it too early, then it'd be a case of the instructor wouldn't have come in. If I'd have left it too late, the instructor would have told him off for not wearing it. So it was a very clever explanation of what had happened. Anyway, not long after, there's an interesting line. I got me again with interesting. A line of dialogue by Thrawn. He tells Vanto, when an attack comes, it is usually best to be out of the target zone, if possible. And then that is an immediate foreshadowing, because about 2 sentences later, they're ambushed by 3 hooded assailants. So Vanto is pushed out of the way by Thrawn, and Thrawn takes the 3 on, and he does get slightly injured. He falls to his feet on his haunches, but it's the where Vanto recovers, and he has a moment of doubt in his mind. Does he help Thrawn, or does he let Thrawn defend himself and potentially help himself by going back to his home world if Thrawn's dismissed? And I know this was fleshing out Vanto's character, but I wasn't impressed by it. I feel like it was a cheap shot, essentially, to, you know, I'm reading his thoughts about how he thinks, oh, you know, maybe I can go home, maybe this will be my pathway, and I'm thinking, well, maybe it won't. You know, I think he was thinking too much on it, if that makes sense. You know, it wouldn't have been bad if it had been a momentary thought, you know, a fleeting thought. But it was a full-blown thought. You know, you have like 3-4 lines of text, and you're thinking, you know, you've overthought this. By now, you should be helping him. So I know that this might be deliberate in the sense that it's to remind you Vanto isn't a likeable protagonist, or he doesn't have to be likeable at all times. But equally, I wasn't particularly fond of it. So I'm going to wait and see where it goes, but it's not something that warmed me to Vanto. I feel like he was too cowardly or too protective of himself. And I think, you know, Thrawn is obviously very clever, very intuitive. And when he does actually go to help Thrawn after, just to be clear. And there's a line of dialogue where he says, I hope Thrawn didn't realise I hesitated. And I think, well, that's the problem. He did. So Thrawn probably did realise it, and he's just not brought it up. So he creates problems for himself, Vanto, and I'm going to assume he'll be called upon it eventually. So it really doesn't make him likeable. I mean, again, maybe it's something that will be called upon, but right now it's just irritating me a little bit. I'm wanting to see his character push forward a little bit more, a little bit faster, but maybe gotta wait until he gets out of the academy for this to happen. So yeah, that is pretty much chapter 5. The chapter concludes just by saying, right, they've made their moves, they've attacked us privately and publicly. Now we'll go and talk to the Commandant Denlot from the previous Thrawn chapter about the incident, and they'll be stamping out what's going on. But yeah, I really enjoyed the. I'm going to call it the poker game because there was some game title for it, and I haven't really taken note of that. But I did like the idea of that scene. It was very. There was so much subtext in that sense. You know, you weren't reading what they were talking about within the card game. You were reading about what they were talking about as far as ambushes, and it was just beautifully written. But yeah, out of the two, I did enjoy chapter 5 more. I think, again, it's the Thrawn bias. It is his book, so you're drawn into his chapters a little bit more. But that's certainly not dismissing chapter 4. I did enjoy reading about Price. I was a bit surprised how cold she can be already. But again, that's not a really surprise considering we know where she goes. So yeah, I'm quite interested to see what happens next. So I'm hoping to read chapter 6 and 7 for next week. Hopefully I can get on to 8. I'll admit I'm also reading the audiobook at the same time, so I'm having it in my ears and reading it with my eyes. So I'm a little frustrated there. I've said I'm a slow reader, yet I've got to admit the audiobook is slow. And when I've tried to put it on 1.5 times or 2 times speed, suddenly the music in the background goes, you know, and just goes really too fast. So it's taking about half an hour to read a chapter, and I'm not that slow. So I am enjoying the audiobook. I'm not going to put it down, but equally, yeah, I just wish it hadn't been that awkward. So, usual finishing stuff. If you haven't already, hit the like button. If you don't like this or you've got criticisms of the video, leave a dislike and just let me know why you've left it. Because I don't mind that. I understand people might disagree with my opinions or dislike my video style or whatever, but just explain it. That way I can at least understand where it's coming from. If you haven't already and you wish to, subscribe to the channel. And yeah, that's about it. So I'll be back next week, but until then, this has been Josh from JJ's Productions, and until next time, bye for now, everyone.